The last thing Amelia Grant expected when she stepped onto the weathered porch of the abandoned trading post was to feel the wood give way beneath her boot like rotted paper, sending her plummeting into darkness with a scream that echoed across the California foothills. Pain exploded through her ankle as she landed hard on the packed earth beneath the structure, her vision swimming with stars as the dimming light of dusk filtered through the splintered hole above her head. She tried to call out, but her voice came weakly, and the world tilted sideways as unconsciousness pulled her down into its black embrace. Thomas Everett heard the scream from nearly half a mile away, his hand freezing on the rope he had been coiling outside his cabin. The sound carried clear and sharp through the still evening air of the Sierra Nevada foothills, and every instinct honed by 8 years of living alone in these mountains told him someone was in trouble. He dropped the rope immediately and started running toward the old Wilkinson trading post, his long legs eating up the distance with powerful strides. His dark hair, grown past his shoulders after months without a proper barber, flew behind him as he crashed through the underbrush, his muscular frame moving with surprising grace despite his size. The year was 1878, and Angels Camp, California, had seen better days. What had once been a thriving mining settlement during the gold rush had settled into a quieter existence, though prospectors still passed through with dreams of striking it rich. Thomas had come here seeking solitude after the war, after watching too many friends die in battles that seemed meaningless now. He had built his cabin with his own hands, 26 years old, and wanting nothing more than peace and the company of the mountains. At 6 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry a full-grown deer, he cut an imposing figure, but his hazel eyes held a gentleness that most people never got close enough to see. He reached the trading post just as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. The structure had been abandoned for nearly 2 years, ever since old man Wilkinson had died without heirs to claim the property. Thomas approached cautiously, his eyes immediately spotting the jagged hole in the porch where someone had clearly fallen through. He dropped to his knees at the edge, peering down into the shadowy space beneath. "Hello, can you hear me?" His deep voice carried into the darkness below. No response came, and his heart kicked into a faster rhythm. Thomas tested the remaining boards carefully, finding them just as rotten as the one that had given way. He would not risk the porch collapsing further. Instead, he moved to the side of the building where a crawl space entrance had been built for access to the foundation. The opening was small, but Thomas squeezed his broad shoulders through with some effort, his muscles flexing as he pulled himself into the cramped area beneath the porch. The smell of damp earth and old wood filled his nostrils as he crawled forward, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. Then he saw her, a crumpled form in a dress the color of sage, lying motionless where she had fallen. Thomas reached her in seconds, his large hands gentle as he carefully checked for injuries. She was breathing, thank God, but unconscious, and when he examined her left ankle, he could see it was already beginning to swell. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and now spread around her head like a copper halo. Even in the poor light, he could see she had a face that would make angels weep, delicate features dusted with freckles across her nose. Her dress, though dusty now, was well made, suggesting she was not some drifter passing through. Thomas frowned, wondering what a woman like this was doing at an abandoned trading post alone at dusk. Miss, can you hear me?" he spoke quietly, not wanting to startle her if she woke. When she remained still, he made a decision. He could not leave her here, and he could not wait for her to wake on her own. Night fell quickly in the mountains, and the temperature would drop with it. She needed shelter, warmth, and someone to tend that ankle. Thomas positioned himself carefully and gathered her into his arms, mindful of her injured leg. She was light compared to the logs he hauled daily, and he navigated the crawl space with her cradled against his chest, protecting her head from the low beams. Once outside, he stood to his full height and looked down at the woman in his arms. Her face was peaceful in unconsciousness, and something in his chest tightened at the trust inherent in her stillness. He could have taken her to town. Angel's camp was only 3 miles down the mountain, and Doc Peterson would have tended to her. But something made Thomas hesitate. The protective instinct that had driven him to charge into battle to save his comrades, the same instinct that had been dormant for so long, roared to life. This woman needed help now, and his cabin was closer. He would see to her immediate needs, and when she woke, they could decide the next steps together. The walk to his cabin took 20 minutes, and Thomas used the time to study his unexpected guest. She wore no wedding ring, he noticed, though a simple silver chain disappeared beneath the collar of her dress. Her hands were soft but not pampered, suggesting she worked but not at hard labor. A teacher, perhaps, or a shopkeeper's daughter. Her dress was practical, made for travel, and he spotted a small bag that must have fallen near her. He had grabbed it before leaving the trading post, tucking it into his belt. Thomas pushed open the door to his cabin with his shoulder, entering the single large room that served as his entire living space. The cabin was simple but well built, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall, a sturdy bed in one corner, a handmade table and chairs, and shelves lined with supplies and books. He had built it all himself, taking pride in the honest work of his hands. Now, as he looked at it through a stranger's eyes, he wondered what she would think when she woke. He laid her gently on his bed, the only bed, and immediately moved to build up the fire. The temperature had already started to drop, and he wanted the cabin warm before she woke. Once the fire was crackling, Thomas lit the oil lamps and turned his attention back to his guest. Her color looked better in the warm light, and her breathing remained steady and deep. Thomas had learned basic medical care during his years in the cavalry, and he drew on that knowledge now. He carefully removed her left boot, his large fingers surprisingly deft with the laces, and examined her ankle. It was definitely sprained, possibly worse, but he did not think it was broken. He retrieved clean cloth from his supply chest and soaked strips in cold water from his barrel, then wrapped her ankle carefully to reduce the swelling. As he worked, he found himself studying her face again. She was beautiful. There was no denying it, but there was something else too, a strength in the set of her jaw even in sleep, a determination visible in the faint lines around her eyes. This was a woman who had known hardship and faced it head-on. Thomas felt drawn to her in a way he could not explain, as if some invisible thread connected them. Once her ankle was wrapped, Thomas covered her with his spare blankets and stepped back. She would likely sleep through the night, her body's way of healing from the shock and pain. He looked around his cabin and then out the window at the gathering darkness. The porch. The thought struck him with sudden force. That porch had nearly killed her, and it could easily injure someone else. The Wilkinson trading post sat on what was technically public land now, used by travelers and prospectors seeking shelter. Someone else could fall through just as easily. Thomas made a decision that would have surprised anyone who knew him. He was not a social man, not anymore. He avoided town and kept to himself. But the thought of someone else getting hurt, the thought of this woman waking to learn he had done nothing to prevent future accidents, bothered him deeply. He would fix the porch. He would rebuild it properly, the way it should have been maintained all along. He glanced at the sleeping woman one more time, then began gathering his tools. He had plenty of good lumber stacked outside, cut from trees on his property. He had nails, a hammer, a saw, everything he needed. The moon was nearly full tonight, and he had lanterns for additional light. It would take most of the night, but Thomas was no stranger to hard work or long hours. Before he left, he placed a pitcher of water and a cup on the table beside the bed, within easy reach. He also left a note, written in his careful script on a piece of brown paper. "You are safe. Injured your ankle. I have gone to repair the porch where you fell. Will return by morning. There is food in the pot by the fire if you wake hungry. Thomas Everett." He studied the note, then added one more line. "You are welcome here." Thomas gathered his tools and lumber, loading them onto the small cart he used for hauling. The trip back to the trading post took longer with the heavy load, but he did not mind. The physical work felt good, familiar, and it gave him time to think. Who was this woman? What had brought her to Angel's Camp, and why had she been at the abandoned trading post? Questions swirled through his mind, but he pushed them aside. Time enough for answers when she woke. The trading post looked eerie in the moonlight, its shadow stretching long across the scrub grass. Thomas unloaded his supplies and lit his lanterns, hanging them from nails on the building's exterior to illuminate his work area. Then he set about examining the porch more carefully. It was worse than he had thought. The entire structure was compromised, not just the one board that had broken. Years of weather and neglect had rotted the support beams, and the floorboards were barely holding together. This was not a simple repair job. He would need to rebuild the entire porch from the foundation up. Thomas rolled up his sleeves and got to work. First, he carefully tore away all the old, rotten wood, stacking it to one side to burn later. The physical labor felt good, his muscles warming to the task as he ripped apart the dangerous structure. Sweat began to glisten on his skin despite the cool night air, and he worked with the focused intensity of a man with a purpose. Once the old porch was demolished, he examined the foundation posts. 2 of them would need to be replaced entirely. Thomas took his shovel and dug out the old posts, his powerful shoulders and back doing the work of 2 normal men. Then he set new posts, cut to the exact height needed, and tamped the earth firmly around them. He tested each post multiple times, throwing his full weight against them to ensure they would hold. With the foundation secure, Thomas began building the frame. He measured twice and cut once, his movements precise despite the late hour. The frame took shape slowly, sturdy beams fitted together with the skill of a man who had built his own home. He used his level frequently, making sure everything was square and true. This porch would last another 50 years if properly maintained. As he worked, Thomas found his thoughts drifting back to the woman sleeping in his bed. He wondered what color her eyes were. He wondered what her voice sounded like. He wondered if she had family waiting for her, worried about her absence. The protective feeling that had driven him to carry her to safety had not faded. If anything, it had grown stronger, settling into his chest like a warm coal that refused to go out. The night deepened around him, and still Thomas worked. He laid the floorboards next, each one carefully placed and nailed down with 3 nails instead of the usual 2. He would take no chances with this porch. Each board was tested under his weight before he moved to the next one. The rhythmic sound of his hammer rang out across the quiet hillside, a steady beat that measured the passing hours. By the time he started on the railing, the moon had traveled halfway across the sky. Thomas's muscles ached with good, honest fatigue, but he did not stop. He built the railing sturdy and true, waist high and strong enough to lean against without worry. His hands moved with the confidence born of experience, and slowly the new porch emerged from the lumber pile, solid and safe. As he worked on the final touches, sanding down rough edges and making sure no nails protruded to catch clothing or skin, Thomas allowed himself to imagine the woman's reaction when she learned what he had done. Would she think him strange for working through the night on a building he did not own? Would she understand that he could not bear the thought of anyone else getting hurt the way she had? The first hints of dawn were touching the eastern sky when Thomas stepped back to examine his work. The new porch gleamed pale in the lamplight, every board perfectly placed, every joint secure. It was good work, some of the best he had done, and he felt a surge of satisfaction. He tested it one final time, walking across every inch, putting his full weight on the railing, even jumping in the center to test the support beams. The porch did not creak or shift. It was solid as stone. Thomas cleaned up his work site, gathering his tools and loading them back onto the cart. He scattered the wood shavings and sawdust, swept the new porch clean with a makeshift broom of bundled grass, and extinguished his lanterns. The sky was growing lighter by the minute, the deep purple of pre-dawn giving way to soft pink and gold. He made the journey back to his cabin as the sun broke over the mountains, painting the world in warm light. Thomas felt the fatigue in his bones now, a deep tiredness that came from a full night's work, but he also felt good, useful. He had forgotten what it felt like to do something for someone else, to use his strength to help rather than simply to survive. As he approached his cabin, Thomas slowed his steps. Smoke was rising from the chimney, more than the banked fire would have produced. She was awake. His heart began to beat faster, and he was suddenly aware of how he must look, covered in sawdust, his shirt damp with sweat, his hair wild from a night of work. He ran a hand through it self-consciously, then shook his head at his own vanity. He was a mountain man, not a dandy. She would either accept him as he was or not at all. Thomas pushed open the door and stopped short. The woman was sitting at his table, her injured foot propped on a second chair, and she was holding his note in one hand while a cup of coffee steamed in the other. When she looked up at him, he felt the impact of her gaze like a physical thing. Her eyes were green, the deep green of pine needles, and they were fixed on him with an expression he could not quite read. "You rebuilt the porch," she said, and her voice was exactly as he had imagined it would be, soft but strong, with an underlying current of warmth. "The entire porch, in one night?" Thomas stood in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. "Yes, miss, I could not leave it as it was. Someone else might have been hurt." She stared at him for a long moment, those green eyes searching his face as if trying to solve a puzzle. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her features, and Thomas felt his breath catch. She was beautiful when serious, but smiling, she was radiant. "You are either the kindest man in California or completely mad," she said, but there was no accusation in her tone, only wonder. "I am Amelia Grant, and I owe you my life, Mr. Everett." Thomas stepped into the cabin, closing the door behind him. "Thomas, please, and you do not owe me anything. I did what anyone would have done." "No," Amelia said firmly, shaking her head. "You did far more than that. I read your note. Then I heard the hammering stop and went to the window." She gestured to the eastern window that faced the direction of the trading post. "I could see your lanterns, still lit at the trading post even as dawn approached. You worked all night, did you not?" There seemed little point in denying it. Thomas nodded, moving to the water barrel to wash his hands and face. The cool water felt good against his skin, and he used a cloth to wipe away the worst of the sawdust and sweat. When he turned back, he found Amelia still watching him, her expression thoughtful. "Why?" she asked simply. Thomas considered his answer carefully. I have spent the last 8 years trying to forget the war, trying to forget what it feels like to care about anyone except myself. When I heard you scream, when I found you lying there, something in me woke up. I could not leave that porch broken. I could not risk anyone else falling through. It was not about being kind. It was about doing what was right. Amelia was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. I came to Angel's Camp looking for a fresh start, she said finally. I was a teacher in Sacramento, but the school closed when the funding dried up. I heard they needed a teacher here, so I took what little money I had saved and came west. The trading post was supposed to be a shortcut to town, but obviously that did not work out as planned. Your ankle, Thomas said, moving closer to examine it. How does it feel? It hurts, Amelia admitted, but I have had worse. You wrapped it well. You have medical training. Some. The cavalry teaches you basic care, enough to keep a man alive until a real doctor can see to him. Thomas knelt beside her chair, his large hands gentle as he checked the wrapping. You should stay off it for a few days at least. The swelling needs to go down before you try to walk on it. I cannot stay here, Amelia protested, though her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. It would not be proper. You have been more than kind already, but I cannot impose on you further. Thomas sat back on his heels, looking up at her. Miss Grant, the nearest town is 3 miles down a mountain trail. You cannot walk, and I do not have a horse or wagon to carry you. Even if I could get you to town, what then? The boarding house is run by Mrs. Henderson, and she is a good woman, but she has no room for someone who needs constant care. Doc Peterson lives above his office, and he is a bachelor. That would be even less proper than staying here. Amelia bit her lip, clearly wrestling with the situation. Thomas could see the war between practicality and propriety playing out across her expressive features. Finally, she sighed. You make a convincing argument, but I cannot take your bed. Where did you sleep last night? I did not, Thomas said honestly. I was rebuilding the porch. Her eyes widened. You worked all night and have not slept at all. I am fine, Thomas assured her, though now that the adrenaline of work was fading, he could feel the exhaustion creeping in. I have gone longer without sleep before. Amelia shook her head firmly. That settles it then. You will sleep in your bed, and I will rest here in this chair. When you wake, we can discuss the arrangements going forward, but I will not be responsible for you collapsing from exhaustion on top of everything else. Thomas wanted to argue, but a massive yawn caught him by surprise, and Amelia laughed, the sound like music in the quiet cabin. See, your body knows what it needs even if your stubborn mind does not. Go, sleep. I promise I will not run off while you rest. He wanted to protest further, but the bed looked inviting, and his body ached with the need for rest. At least let me bank the fire and bring in more wood first, he said. Together they worked out a system. Thomas handled the heavy tasks, building up the fire and bringing in enough wood to last the day, while Amelia directed him from her chair, occasionally hopping on her good foot to reach something she needed. It was strangely domestic, this easy partnership, and Thomas found himself enjoying it more than he wanted to admit. Finally, when everything was settled and Amelia was comfortable with a book from his shelf and a fresh cup of coffee, Thomas allowed himself to collapse onto his bed. The pillow smelled like her now, a faint scent of lavender and something uniquely her, and he breathed it in as his eyes fell closed. His last conscious thought was of green eyes and a smile that could light up the darkness. When Thomas woke, the light streaming through the windows told him it was late afternoon. He sat up quickly, disoriented for a moment, then remembered. Amelia. He looked around and found her still in the chair by the table, but she had moved it closer to the window and was gazing out at the mountain vista, the book forgotten in her lap. How long did I sleep? He asked, his voice rough from rest, Amelia turned and her smile was gentle. About 6 hours. I was beginning to wonder if you would sleep through to tomorrow. Thomas stood, stretching muscles that were stiff but no longer aching. You should have woken me. You must be uncomfortable in that chair. I am fine, Amelia assured him. Besides, you needed the rest. You cannot care for an injured woman if you are dead on your feet. Thomas moved to the fire and ladled stew from the pot hanging there, the same stew he had made 2 days ago and had been eating ever since. It was simple fare, venison and vegetables, but it was hot and filling. Are you hungry? This is nothing fancy, but it is edible. I already helped myself to some earlier, Amelia admitted. It was delicious. You are a good cook. Years of practice, Thomas said, settling at the table with his bowl. When you live alone, you either learn to cook or you starve. They fell into an easy conversation as Thomas ate, and he learned more about Amelia Grant. She was 23 years old, originally from Missouri, and had come west with her parents during the gold rush when she was just a child. Her father had never struck it rich, but he had found steady work as a surveyor, and her mother had taken in laundry. They had died 3 years ago in a typhoid outbreak, leaving Amelia alone but determined to make something of herself. Teaching was my mother's idea, Amelia explained. She said I had a gift for explaining things, for making complicated ideas simple. So I studied and got my certificate, and I taught in Sacramento for 2 years. The children were wonderful, but the pay was poor, and when the school closed, I knew I had to find something else. Angel's Camp is lucky to have you, Thomas said, and he meant it. The children here are good kids, but they have not had a proper teacher in years. The last one left to get married, and no one has come to replace her. That is what the school board's letter said, Amelia replied. They are offering room and board plus a small salary. It is not much, but it is a start. I can save money, maybe eventually open a school of my own somewhere. Thomas admired her determination, the way she looked forward despite the setbacks she had faced. What were you doing at the trading post? He asked. It is not on the main road to town. Amelia's cheeks colored slightly. I know. I was trying to save time. I had been walking for hours and I saw the building and thought perhaps I could rest there for a while before continuing to town. I should have been more careful. I should have tested the boards before stepping onto the porch. It was foolish. It was an accident, Thomas said firmly. The porch should have been maintained. It is not your fault it was rotten. Still, Amelia said softly, I should have been more cautious. I was tired and not thinking clearly. If you had not heard me scream, if you had not come when you did. She trailed off, shuddering slightly. But I did, Thomas reminded her. And you are safe now, that is what matters. They were quiet for a moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the wind outside the cabin. Then Amelia spoke again, her voice hesitant. Thomas, can I ask you something personal? Of course. The war. You mentioned you were in the cavalry. Do you mind talking about it? Thomas set down his spoon, his appetite suddenly gone. He had not talked about the war with anyone, not in the 8 years since it ended. But something about Amelia made him want to open up, to share the burden he had been carrying alone for so long. I enlisted when I was 18, he began slowly. I believed in the cause, believed I was fighting for something important. I was young and stupid and thought war was glorious. He laughed bitterly. 4 years in the cavalry taught me different. I saw friends die. I killed men I did not know, men who probably had families and dreams just like I did. By the time it ended, I just wanted to get as far away from people as possible. I came here to these mountains and I built my cabin and I tried to forget. Have you? Amelia asked quietly. Forgotten? No, Thomas admitted. You do not forget things like that, but the mountains are peaceful. They do not ask questions. They do not expect anything from you except respect. It has been good for me, this solitude. But lonely, Amelia said, and it was not a question. Thomas met her eyes and saw understanding there, a recognition of pain that matched his own. Yes, he said simply. Lonely. Amelia reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her skin was soft and warm, and Thomas felt something shift in his chest at the contact. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "And thank you for not letting the loneliness make you hard. You could have left me at the trading post. You could have brought me to town and washed your hands of me. Instead, you carried me to safety, tended my injury, and rebuilt an entire porch to protect strangers you will never meet. That is not the action of a hard man, Thomas Everett. That is the action of a hero." "I am no hero," Thomas protested, but Amelia squeezed his hand. "You are to me," she said simply. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Thomas could not name but felt in every fiber of his being. He wanted to pull her close, to bury his face in her copper hair and breathe in her scent. He wanted to promise he would protect her always, that he would never let anyone or anything hurt her. The intensity of his feelings frightened him. He had known this woman for less than a day. How could he feel so much so quickly? As if sensing his turmoil, Amelia gently withdrew her hand and changed the subject. "Tell me about Angel's Camp. What is it like? Who are the people I will be teaching?" Thomas welcomed the shift to safer ground and spent the next hour describing the town and its inhabitants. Angel's Camp was small, maybe 200 people on a good day, but it had everything a settlement needed. There was a general store run by the Morrison family, a saloon owned by a former prospector named Jack Chen, who had struck gold and used it to buy a business instead of drinking it away, and a church where circuit preachers stopped when they passed through. Doc Peterson was getting old but still sharp, and the schoolhouse had been built 5 years ago by the community working together. The children range from 6 to 15, Thomas explained. Most of them help their families with work, so school is irregular. But they are eager to learn when they can attend. You will like them. "How do you know so much about the town if you stay up here in the mountains?" Amelia asked curiously. "I go down every few weeks for supplies," Thomas admitted. "And the Morrison family, they are good people. They do not pry, but they keep me informed about what is happening. Their daughter, Claire, she is 12 and sharp as a tack. She will probably be one of your best students." They talked until the light began to fade again, and Thomas realized with surprise that a full day had passed. He prepared a simple dinner of cornbread and beans, and they ate together at his table, the conversation flowing easily between them. Amelia told him about her favorite books, and Thomas shared stories about the wildlife he encountered in the mountains. She laughed at his description of a bear that had tried to raid his food stores, and he found himself telling the story with more embellishment than necessary just to hear that laugh again. As darkness fell, the question of sleeping arrangements arose again. Thomas insisted Amelia take the bed, and this time she was too tired to argue. He made himself comfortable on the floor near the fire, using his bedroll and spare blankets. It was not as soft as the bed, but Thomas had slept in far worse conditions. Besides, from here he could watch over Amelia, could make sure she rested comfortably. He lay awake long after her breathing deepened into sleep, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of his feelings. In one day, this woman had turned his carefully ordered life upside down. The solitude he had sought for 8 years suddenly felt less like peace and more like emptiness. The cabin that had been his sanctuary now felt like it was missing something whenever Amelia was not in it. Thomas recognized what was happening to him. He was falling in love quickly and completely with a woman he barely knew. It was madness. It was impossible. It was also undeniable. Every time she smiled at him, his heart beat faster. Every time she spoke his name, warmth spread through his chest. He wanted to protect her, to provide for her, to make her happy. The intensity of these feelings should have terrified him, but instead they felt right, as natural as breathing. But what could he offer her? He was a solitary mountain man with a small cabin and no prospects beyond surviving winter to winter. Amelia was an educated woman, a teacher, with dreams of opening her own school. She deserved someone refined, someone who could give her the life she wanted. Not a scarred veteran who had run away from the world. These thoughts circled through Thomas's mind as he finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, and they were the first things he thought of when he woke the next morning to find Amelia already awake, attempting to hop around the cabin on her good foot. "What are you doing?" he asked, sitting up quickly. Amelia startled and nearly lost her balance, but Thomas was there in an instant, his strong hand steadying her. "I was trying to make coffee," she said sheepishly. "I did not want to wake you, and I thought I could manage." "You should have woken me," Thomas scolded gently. "What if you had fallen and hurt your other ankle? Here, sit down and let me help you." He guided her back to the chair, and Amelia sank into it with a frustrated sigh. "I hate being helpless," she admitted. "I am not used to relying on others." "I understand that feeling," Thomas said, moving to make the coffee. "But there is a difference between being helpless and accepting help when you need it. You are injured. That does not make you weak. It makes you human." Amelia watched him move around the cabin, and Thomas was acutely aware of her gaze following his movements. "You are very wise for someone who claims to avoid people," she observed. "The mountains teach you things," Thomas replied. "Patience, humility, the importance of knowing when to push forward and when to rest and heal." He brought her coffee and a plate of leftover cornbread, then settled across from her with his own breakfast. "We need to talk about what comes next," he said seriously. "Your ankle will need at least a week before you can put weight on it, maybe longer. I can go to town today, explain the situation to the school board, and let them know you have arrived but are delayed due to injury." "That makes sense," Amelia agreed. "But Thomas, I cannot stay here for a week. It would not be proper, and I do not want to cause you trouble or ruin your reputation." Thomas almost laughed at that. "Miss Grant, I have no reputation to ruin. I am the hermit who lives in the mountains. No one expects anything from me, but I understand your concern about propriety. If you prefer, I can ask Mrs. Henderson if she has made room, or perhaps Doc Peterson could keep you at his office." Amelia was quiet for a moment, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup. "Honestly," she said finally, "I feel safer here. You have been nothing but kind and respectful. The thought of being passed around town like an invalid, dependent on the charity of strangers, is far more uncomfortable than staying here with you. But only if you are truly comfortable with it. I do not want to impose on your solitude." Something warm bloomed in Thomas's chest at her words. She felt safe with him. She trusted him. "You are not imposing," he said firmly. "I want you here. I want to help you heal. And when you are ready, I will personally escort you to town and make sure you are settled properly." The smile she gave him made his heart skip a beat. "Thank you, Thomas, for everything." He left for town after breakfast, making the 3-mile journey in less than an hour with his long strides. Angel's Camp was just waking up when he arrived, smoke rising from chimneys and the sound of activity echoing from the general store. Thomas headed straight for the Morrison place, knowing that if anyone would know how to contact the school board, it would be them. Sarah Morrison looked up in surprise when Thomas walked through the door. She was a sturdy woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Thomas Everett, we have not seen you in weeks. Are you out of supplies already?" "No, madam," Thomas said, removing his hat politely. "I came to town on a different matter." The new school teacher, Miss Amelia Grant, she had an accident on her way to town 2 days ago. She fell through the rotten porch at the old Wilkinson place and injured her ankle. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my goodness, is she all right? Where is she now?" "She is at my cabin," Thomas said, watching Sarah's eyebrows rise. "I found her unconscious and brought her there to tend her injuries. Her ankle is badly sprained but not broken. She will need at least a week of rest before she can walk on it." Sarah studied him for a long moment, and Thomas could see her sharp mind working. "I see," she said finally. "That is quite a situation. The school board will need to be informed, of course, and there will be talk, Thomas, whether you care about that or not." "Let them talk," Thomas said firmly. "Miss Grant needed help, and I provided it. Anyone with a problem can take it up with me directly." A small smile played at Sarah's lips. "Well then, I will spread the word and make sure everyone knows the situation. In the meantime, is there anything you need? Supplies for your guest?" Thomas had not thought that far ahead, but now he realized he would need more food, and Amelia might appreciate fresh clothes or other necessities. "Actually, yes. If you could put together a package, I would be grateful. Food, some fabric if you have it, whatever a lady might need for a week's stay." Sarah's smile widened. "I will put together something appropriate. Give me an hour." Thomas agreed and spent the time walking through town, stopping at Doc Peterson's office to describe Amelia's injury and get advice on care. The old doctor listened carefully, asked a few questions, then nodded his approval. "Sounds like you did everything right, son," Doc Peterson said. "Keep her off that ankle. Keep the swelling down with cold compresses, and make sure she does not develop a fever. If anything changes, you come get me immediately. I do not care if it is the middle of the night." Thomas thanked him and returned to the general store to find Sarah had assembled an impressive array of goods. There were eggs, fresh bread, vegetables, coffee, sugar, and even a small tin of tea. She had also included fabric in a soft blue that would complement Amelia's coloring, thread, needles, and basic sewing supplies. "Sarah, this is too much," Thomas protested. "Nonsense," Sarah said briskly. "The school board has a budget for the teacher's needs, and this counts. Besides, Claire has been so excited about the new teacher. When I tell her Miss Grant is injured, she will want to help. Consider this a welcome gift from the whole town." Thomas paid for the supplies he knew were his own and accepted the rest with gratitude. As he was loading everything into a large pack, Sarah touched his arm gently. "Thomas," she said quietly, "I know you prefer to keep to yourself, and we have always respected that. But you are a good man, and this town values you more than you might think. What you are doing for Miss Grant, taking care of her when she has no one else, that is a kindness we will not forget." Thomas felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "I am just doing what is right." "That is what makes you a good man," Sarah replied with a knowing smile. The journey back to the cabin felt shorter with his mind full of Sarah's words. When Thomas pushed open the door, he found Amelia exactly where he had left her, though she had clearly been reading from one of his books. She looked up with such a bright smile that his heart turned over in his chest. "You are back," she said, sounding genuinely pleased. "I was starting to worry." "The trip took longer than expected," Thomas explained, setting down his pack. "But I bring good news and supplies. The town knows you are here and safe. The school board has been informed, and Mrs. Morrison sent a care package." As Thomas unpacked the supplies, Amelia's eyes widened in delight. "Fresh eggs! And is that real tea? Oh, Thomas, this is wonderful!" He found himself grinning at her enthusiasm. "Mrs. Morrison thought you might appreciate some variety. And her daughter Claire is apparently very excited to meet you. She wanted to come up immediately, but I suggested we wait until you are feeling better. I look forward to meeting her, Amelia said warmly, and all the students. I am eager to start teaching. They spent the rest of the day in comfortable companionship. Thomas prepared a proper meal with the fresh ingredients, making scrambled eggs and toasted bread for lunch, while Amelia insisted on helping where she could, chopping vegetables from her chair. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams, and Thomas found himself opening up in ways he never had before. As the days passed, they fell into a routine. Thomas would wake early and tend to the fire and morning chores, then make breakfast for both of them. Amelia's ankle was improving slowly but steadily, and by the third day she could put some weight on it with Thomas's help. He fashioned a crutch from a sturdy branch, and she used it to move around the cabin, delighting in the small independence it provided. Thomas taught her things about living in the mountains, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to identify animal tracks in the dirt around the cabin, which plants were edible and which were poisonous. Amelia shared her knowledge in return, discussing books and poetry, explaining mathematical concepts in ways that made them seem like magic, describing the theories of education that she found most effective. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and Amelia would read aloud while Thomas worked on small projects. He was carving a set of wooden animals for Claire Morrison, having learned from Sarah that the girl collected such things. Amelia's voice filled the cabin with warmth as she read from Shakespeare and Dickens, and Thomas found himself memorizing the cadence of her speech, the way she brought the words to life. On the fourth night, as Amelia finished a particularly moving passage from Great Expectations, she looked up to find Thomas watching her instead of his carving. "What is it?" she asked, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I was just thinking how much I have enjoyed having you here," Thomas admitted. "The cabin feels different with you in it. Better." Amelia set down the book carefully. "I have enjoyed it too, more than I should admit, probably. When I came to Angel's Camp, I expected to live alone in a boarding house to spend my days teaching and my evenings preparing lessons. I never expected to find." She trailed off, seeming unsure how to continue. "Find what?" Thomas prompted gently. "A friend," Amelia said, though something in her eyes suggested the word was insufficient. "Someone I could talk to about anything. Someone who makes me laugh, who challenges me to think differently. Someone who rebuilt an entire porch in the middle of the night just to keep strangers safe." Thomas set down his carving and moved to sit beside her chair. "Amelia, I need to tell you something, and I am not sure how you will receive it." Her green eyes were steady on his face. "You can tell me anything, Thomas." He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "These past few days with you, they have been the best days I have had in years. Maybe ever. When you leave here to start your new life in town, this cabin is going to feel empty in a way it never did before. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as a stranger I was helping and started seeing you as someone I could not bear to lose." Amelia's breath caught, and she reached out to take his hand. "Thomas, I am not finished," he said, needing to get it all out. "I know we have only known each other a few days. I know you have plans for your life that probably do not include a mountain man with more scars than sense, but I have to be honest with you. I am falling in love with you, Amelia Grant. Maybe I already have fallen. And I needed you to know that before you leave here, even if it changes nothing." For a long moment, Amelia just looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Then she lifted her free hand to his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with infinite gentleness. "What makes you think it changes nothing?" she whispered. Thomas's heart began to pound. "What? You think you are the only one whose world has been turned upside down?" Amelia asked, her voice thick with emotion. You think I have not noticed how safe I feel with you, how much I look forward to every conversation, every shared meal, every moment in your presence. Thomas, I came to California looking for a fresh start for a purpose, but what I found was so much more. I found you. Amelia, Thomas breathed, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. I am falling in love with you too, she said clearly, leaving no room for doubt. I probably started falling the moment I woke to find that note you left, when I realized you had spent the entire night rebuilding that porch. What kind of man does that? A man with a heart as strong as his hands, that is who. A man worth loving. Thomas cupped her face in his large hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had spilled onto her cheeks. I do not have much to offer you. Just this cabin, these mountains, and everything I am. That is enough, Amelia said firmly. More than enough. Thomas, I do not need wealth or status. I need someone who sees me, who values my mind as much as my company, who makes me feel like I am exactly where I am supposed to be. You are all of that and more. He kissed her then, gently at first as if she might break, but Amelia pulled him closer, kissing him back with a passion that matched his own. It was a kiss of promise and hope, of two lonely souls finding home in each other. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. Stay with me, he whispered. Not just until your ankle heals. Stay with me always. Marry me, Amelia. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy. Yes, Amelia said without hesitation. Yes, Thomas, I will marry you. Nothing would make me happier. They spent the rest of the evening making plans and talking about their future. Amelia would still teach, they decided. The school was not far from the cabin, and Thomas could build her a small wagon so she could drive down the mountain each day. Or better yet, they could build a house closer to town, something bigger than the cabin where they could start a family. I want children, Amelia confessed, her head resting on Thomas's shoulder as they sat together by the fire. At least 3 or 4. I want to fill a home with laughter and love. I want that too, Thomas admitted. I want to teach sons to hunt and fish, to respect the land and work with their hands. I want to teach daughters to be strong and independent like their mother. I want all of it, as long as it is with you. On the 7th day after her accident, Amelia's ankle had healed enough that she could walk with only slight discomfort. Thomas insisted on carrying her down the mountain anyway, not trusting the rough trail with her still tender injury. She laughed and protested but ultimately gave in, wrapping her arms around his neck as he lifted her easily. You know, she said as they made their way down the mountain, I could get used to being carried everywhere. I would be happy to oblige, Thomas replied with a grin. Though the students might think it strange if I carry their teacher into the schoolhouse every morning. Let them think what they want, Amelia said contentedly. I have you. That is all that matters. The town of Angels Camp received the news of their engagement with enthusiasm. Sarah Morrison cried happy tears and immediately began planning a wedding celebration. Doc Peterson clapped Thomas on the back and declared it the best medicine he could have prescribed. Even the school board, while initially concerned about propriety, was won over when they met Amelia and saw the obvious love between her and Thomas. She will be teaching as Mrs. Everett then, the board chairman said, a rotund man named Harold Green. That is unusual but not unheard of. As long as the children are being educated, I suppose that is what matters. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church, with half the town in attendance. Amelia wore a dress of soft blue, made from the fabric Sarah Morrison had sent, altered and enhanced by the combined efforts of several town women who had taken Amelia under their collective wing. Thomas wore his best clothes, which were not fancy but were clean and well-mended, and Sarah had convinced him to trim his hair and beard, though she left them long enough to suit his mountain lifestyle. Claire Morrison served as Amelia's attendant, glowing with pride at being chosen for the honor. Thomas had asked Jack Chen, the saloon owner, to stand with him, and the older man had accepted with a solemn nod. The circuit preacher, a kind man named Reverend Matthews, performed the ceremony with warmth and humor, and when Thomas kissed his bride, the entire congregation erupted in cheers. The celebration that followed was joyous and loud, with food and music and dancing in the town square. Thomas danced with his wife, marveling at how natural it felt to call her that, how right it was to hold her in his arms while their community celebrated around them. Amelia glowed with happiness, her laughter ringing out as Thomas spun her carefully, always mindful of her still healing ankle. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Thomas and Amelia slipped away from the celebration. They rode in a wagon borrowed from the Morrisons, heading back up the mountain to the cabin that was now truly their home. Thomas had spent the past weeks making improvements, adding a larger bed, more shelves, a proper wardrobe, and even a small desk where Amelia could prepare her lessons. "It is not much," Thomas said as he carried his bride over the threshold, "but it is ours." "It is perfect," Amelia assured him, kissing him soundly, "because you are in it." That night, as they lay together in their bed, wrapped in each other's arms, Thomas marveled at how completely his life had changed in less than a month. He had gone from a solitary mountain man, content with his isolation, to a husband with a wife he adored and a future full of promise. All because of a rotten porch step and a woman's scream at dusk. "What are you thinking about?" Amelia murmured sleepily against his chest. "How lucky I am," Thomas replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "How a terrible accident brought me the greatest gift I have ever received." "We are both lucky," Amelia said. "I fell through that porch and I fell into a new life, a better life. And I rebuilt the porch," Thomas added with a smile, "and in doing so I rebuilt myself. You made me remember what it is like to care about someone, to want to be part of the world again." "You saved me, Amelia." She tilted her head up to look at him, her green eyes luminous in the firelight. "Then we saved each other. That seems fair." The weeks turned to months, and Thomas and Amelia settled into married life with surprising ease. Amelia began teaching at the Angels Camp School, and true to Thomas's prediction, the children adored her. She made learning exciting and relevant, incorporating lessons about the natural world that Thomas taught her, bringing mathematics to life with practical applications. Claire Morrison became her star pupil and something of a younger sister figure. The girl would often visit the cabin on weekends, and Thomas would take both her and Amelia on walks through the mountains, teaching them to track animals and identify plants. Claire soaked up the knowledge like a sponge, and Thomas found he enjoyed teaching almost as much as Amelia did. Thomas himself took on odd jobs around town, using his skills as a builder to help repair structures and construct new ones. Word of his work on the Wilkinson porch had spread, and people sought him out for projects they wanted done right. He was surprised to find he enjoyed the work and the social interaction, though he always looked forward to returning to the cabin and his wife at the end of each day. In the spring, Amelia announced she was pregnant, and Thomas's joy knew no bounds. He immediately began planning an addition to the cabin, a nursery for their child, with windows facing east to catch the morning light. He worked on it every spare moment, determined to have it finished before the baby arrived. "You are going to spoil this child," Amelia laughed one afternoon, watching him carefully sand a cradle he had built by hand. "Our child deserves the best I can give," Thomas replied seriously. And that includes a cradle that will not give them splinters. Their daughter was born in early winter, delivered by Doc Peterson with Sarah Morrison assisting. Thomas paced outside the cabin for hours, nearly wearing a path in the frozen ground, until Sarah emerged with a smile to announce mother and child were both healthy. They named her Rose, and she had Amelia's green eyes and Thomas's dark hair. Thomas held her for the first time with tears streaming down his face, marveling at the tiny, perfect life he and Amelia had created. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your papa, and I promise I will always protect you." Amelia, exhausted but radiant, smiled at the picture they made. "She is beautiful, is she not?" "She is perfect," Thomas agreed. "Just like her mother." Rose was followed 2 years later by a son they named Matthew, and then 2 years after that by another daughter named Elizabeth. The cabin grew with each addition, Thomas adding rooms and improvements until it was a proper house, comfortable and warm. Amelia continued teaching until Rose was born, then took a few years to focus on their growing family, but she never lost her passion for education. She taught their children at home, and the house was always filled with books and laughter and learning. Thomas became a respected member of the Angels Camp community, known for his integrity and skill. He never lost his love for the mountains, but he no longer hid in them. Instead, he shared them with his family, teaching his children to respect and appreciate the wilderness that had once been his only solace. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Amelia back to the old Wilkinson trading post. It had been purchased by a young couple from Sacramento, and they had turned it into a successful general store. The porch Thomas had rebuilt still stood strong and solid, showing no signs of wear despite a decade of use. "You remember?" Thomas asked, standing with Amelia on that porch, his arm around her waist. "How could I forget?" Amelia replied, leaning into his embrace. "I fell through a rotten board, and I fell into the rest of my life. I rebuilt this porch," Thomas said, "and I thought I was just preventing future accidents. But really, I was building our future. Every board I nailed down was a promise I did not know I was making yet. A promise to care for you, to build a life with you, to create something strong and lasting." Amelia turned in his arms and kissed him softly. "You have kept that promise every day for 10 years. You have given me a home, a family, and a love I never dreamed possible. You are my mountain, Thomas Everett, strong and steady and constant." "And you are my compass," Thomas replied. "You showed me the way back to the world, back to life, back to being human. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." They stood together on that porch as the sun set, painting the sky in the same oranges and purples that had colored the evening when Amelia fell. And they knew they were exactly where they belonged. Years continued to pass, and the Everett family became a cornerstone of Angels Camp. Their children grew strong and smart, each one a perfect blend of their parents. Rose inherited her mother's gift for teaching and her father's love of the outdoors, often leading nature walks for younger children in the community. Matthew became a skilled carpenter like his father, though he dreamed of designing buildings rather than just constructing them. Elizabeth, the youngest, showed early signs of being a natural healer, spending hours with Doc Peterson learning everything he would teach her. Thomas and Amelia watched their children grow with pride and wonder. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, they would sit together on the porch Thomas had built onto their expanded home, looking out at the mountain vista and marveling at the life they had created. "Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked one evening. "Giving up your dream of opening your own school to marry a mountain man and raise children in the wilderness?" Amelia looked at him as if he had grown a second head. "Regret?" Thomas, this is my dream. Maybe not the one I thought I had when I came to California, but a better one. I have taught more through my children than I ever could have in a classroom. I have loved more deeply than I thought possible. I have lived more fully than I ever imagined. How could I regret any of that? I just want you to be happy, Thomas said softly. I am, Amelia assured him, taking his hand. I am deliriously, completely, utterly happy. And it is all because I fell through a rotten porch step and found a man who would spend all night rebuilding it just to keep others safe. That is who you are, Thomas. That is who you have always been. My protector, my partner, my love. When Rose turned 18 and announced her intention to become a teacher like her mother, Amelia cried happy tears. When Matthew apprenticed himself to an architect in San Francisco, Thomas felt a pang at his son leaving but swelled with pride at his ambition. When Elizabeth was accepted to a women's medical college at 20, both parents celebrated the bright future ahead of their youngest child. But the house was never empty for long. Rose brought her students to visit, teaching them about the mountains and the wilderness just as Thomas had taught her. Matthew returned regularly with plans and ideas, often building projects in Angel's Camp that improved the growing town. Elizabeth came home every summer, using her medical training to provide free care to the community that had raised her. And when Rose married a kind teacher named Samuel and gave Thomas and Amelia their first grandchild, the circle continued. The baby girl, named Amelia Rose after both her grandmother and mother, brought new life and laughter to the mountain home. Thomas held his granddaughter with the same wonder he had felt holding his own children, his hair now more silver than dark, his face lined with age but his body still strong from a lifetime of physical work. "Hello, little one," he whispered, using the same words he had spoken to Rose so many years ago. "I am your grandfather, and I have a story to tell you about how your grandmother and I met." Amelia, sitting beside him with her own hair showing threads of silver, smiled. "You are going to bore the poor child with that story already?" "It is a good story," Thomas protested. "It has adventure, romance, carpentry. What more could you want?" "I suppose when you put it that way," Amelia laughed, the sound as bright and clear as it had been 25 years ago when Thomas first heard it. They grew old together, Thomas and Amelia, their love deepening with each passing year. They saw Angel's Camp transform from a rough mining settlement to a proper town with paved streets and electric lights. They saw their children build successful lives and their grandchildren grow strong and bright. They saw the wilderness they loved become more accessible as the world modernized, but they never lost their appreciation for its beauty and power. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire town threw a celebration in their honor. The church was decorated with wildflowers, and tables were set up in the square laden with food. Their children and grandchildren came from near and far, and speeches were made about the impact Thomas and Amelia had made on the community. 50 years ago, Thomas said when it was his turn to speak, his voice still strong despite his 76 years. "I was a man who had given up on the world. I lived alone in a cabin, content with my solitude, or so I thought. Then one evening at dusk, I heard a scream and I found a young woman who had fallen through a rotten porch. I could have helped her and sent her on her way. Instead, I spent the entire night rebuilding that porch, and in the process, I rebuilt my life." He looked at Amelia, still beautiful to him despite the years that had lined her face. "This woman taught me that it is never too late to start over, to love, to live. She gave me children and grandchildren. She gave me purpose and joy. She gave me everything. And all because she fell through a porch step at dusk. And all because you rebuilt it before I woke," Amelia added, standing to join him. You could have left it broken. You could have thought only of yourself, but you did not. You thought of everyone who might come after, everyone who might be hurt. That is the man I fell in love with. That is the man I have loved for 50 years. That is the man I will love until my last breath. They kissed then, surrounded by their family and community, and the applause that erupted was deafening. It was a celebration not just of a marriage, but of a love that had transformed 2 lives and touched countless others. Thomas lived to be 82, passing peacefully in his sleep with Amelia holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you," spoken to the woman who had been his partner, his friend, his everything for over 50 years. The town mourned him deeply, remembering not just the carpenter and builder, but the man who had shown them all what true strength looked like. Amelia lived 3 more years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling stories about their grandfather and the life they had built together. She passed away on a spring morning, sitting in the garden Thomas had built for her, surrounded by the wildflowers he had planted decades ago. They were buried side by side in the Angels Camp Cemetery, under a simple headstone that read, "Thomas and Amelia Everett." He rebuilt a porch, and she rebuilt his heart. Together they built a life. But their story did not end there. Rose continued her mother's legacy of teaching, eventually opening the school Amelia had once dreamed of, naming it the Everett Academy in honor of her parents. Matthew designed buildings throughout California, always incorporating the principles of strength and durability his father had taught him. Elizabeth became a renowned physician, known for her compassionate care and dedication to serving underserved communities. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward the values Thomas and Amelia had instilled: hard work, compassion, the importance of community, and the power of love to transform lives. The old Wilkinson trading post, where it had all begun, became a historical landmark, and the porch Thomas had rebuilt was preserved and maintained as a reminder of the night that changed everything. And sometimes, on quiet evenings at dusk, when the light painted the sky in oranges and purples, people swore they could feel the presence of Thomas and Amelia, standing together as they had so many times before, looking out at the mountains they loved and the community they had helped build. A love story that began with a broken porch and a midnight rescue had become legend, a reminder that sometimes the greatest loves come from the most unexpected beginnings, and that a single act of kindness can change not just one life, but generations to come. The cabin Thomas built still stood on the mountain, maintained by his descendants as a family retreat. The rooms he had added for each child remained, filled with memories and laughter. The porch he had built overlooked the same vista he and Amelia had admired for over 50 years, and it remained strong and solid, just like the love it represented. In the end, Thomas and Amelia's story was not just about a mountain man and a teacher who fell in love. It was about 2 people who had each been broken in their own way, finding healing in each other. It was about the choice to help, to care, to build something lasting even when no one was watching. It was about the transformative power of love and the way a single evening at dusk could change the course of multiple lives. It was about a woman who fell through a rotten porch step and into her future, and a man who rebuilt that porch board by board through the night, not knowing he was also rebuilding his capacity to love, to hope, to dream. It was about the family they created, the community they served, and the legacy they left behind. And it all started with a scream at dusk, a midnight construction project, and 2 hearts brave enough to take a chance on love.